Hello, my dear viewers. This amazing story will be very instructive for you. It is very interesting and beautiful. I wish you enjoy watching it. The Bearded Gamekeeper. For several hours now, he had been looking around his lot. Cautiously, he froze and made a sign to his dog. Quiet, boy. Listen, a huge dog, a mix of some large breed of dog. He shook off the snow he'd just enjoyed tumbling in and fell silent, turning his head in the direction his master was pointing. The forest was filled with familiar sounds. The trees creaked under the weight of the snow. From time to time there was a crunch of dry twigs. Here and there could be heard the flapping of the wings of birds that had been spooked by cautious beasts or whatever. See how, brother? Winter came unexpectedly this year. After a little silence, he turned to his companion. Yesterday there was no snow, and today everything is already covered with snow. Hey, look how low the clouds are. The dog looked at his master with such understanding as if he wanted to keep the dialogue. The huntsman smiled and patted his big head. All right. Now let's go to the bear's corner and see what the hole is, and then home to warm up. We'll just have to stop by the Stone's place in the village. She promised to give us some eggs and milk. I'll remind you to get some bread and breadcrumbs. We finished our meal. So talking to the dog, the gamekeeper moved on. He was a strange and sullen man. None of the inhabitants of the surrounding villages did not remember when he appeared in these remote places. All they knew was that he had taken the place of the late Jack, but that he had settled not in the village, but on the old fork. He only went out to people to buy something. Sometimes if he saw someone in need of a man's help, he would show up in silence and work tirelessly. Until he finished the job, he did not make friends with anyone and rejected any attempts to get close to him. That's why locals nicknamed him Biryukov. No one knew how old he was and what he really looks like, because his face was hidden behind a thick, though not long beard, and his eyes were hidden under his eyebrows. Biryuk talked quietly and little and never answered questions about himself. One day he went to a nearby village to buy some groceries. There were no stores in this county, which consisted of 4 small villages, and the villagers shopped with Cain and his wife Veronica, who owned a traveling sales van. Here was their arrival. The grouse sat back down. Suddenly, from somewhere in the distance came the barking of dogs and the screeching of someone. The man hurried away. Biryuk grabbed a stick and hurriedly dispersed the pack. And then he picked up the poor, bewildered animal. It turned out to be a small puppy, gray with sparse black spots on its head and torso. Biryuk took off his jacket, wrapped it up, and bought not only groceries, but the necessary medicines, driving up to the store. He went home, where he began to nurse the new baby. It had no fractures, but its hide looked like rags. For a while, Biryuk thought he would not survive. For days, the puppy lay there, hardly moving, and his owner had to mix milk and water and force, feed it into his mouth while clenching his jaws. One morning the puppy crawled off the bed, the man who had rescued him, and began licking all over his ears and all over his hand. "Oh, you tramp!" The man was delighted and picked him up in his arms. "You have lived well, good for you, and you know what I called you." "Yes, but how? You were unconscious all the time." "You'll be boy now. I got you in the fight, didn't I?" The man looked for his shaggy, 4-legged friend for a long time, fooling around with him as well, cradling him in his arms. He said some affectionate words, and the dog, as if understanding him gratefully, apparently managed to lick him right in the face. Very soon, Boy grew into a huge dog. He adored his master and hated it in the village, because there from under every back alley barked at him or yard dogs. Boy did not forget anything, but, listening to his master, passed by, proudly raising his shaggy head and not looking at his abusers. And he was also well aware that now it was easy to scatter any pack of dogs on the sides. What about the dogs? Even the wolves did not dare to come close to the huntsman when they saw Boy near him. So now the snow-covered woods. The faithful dog lifted his nose and drew in large nostrils frosty air, trying to distinguish which of the dangerous animals is near, and from which side to expect a threat. Strange. An unfamiliar smell made the dog wary. Baryuk looked at him and realized that he smelled something, listened to himself, and began to look around. But there was nothing unusual around, and they continued on their way. However, after walking a little more, the huntsman saw strange footprints in the snow. If they were a little bigger, he would have thought that a man had walked here. But these footprints were very small. Surprised, Baryuk followed the unknown creature and soon came to a small clearing. Here he stopped, staring at something incomprehensible, and suddenly he cried out in surprise. On the snow was written in block letters, "Find me. Mama." It snowed again, and the fuzzy letters, like the footprints, began to sweep away quickly. "Fight," shouted the huntsman. "Search. There is a child around here somewhere. He must be found. You hear? Search, my dear, search." For more than an hour, the man and the dog searched the immediate surroundings, and Baryuk was getting desperate. The man rushed to his aid and very soon pulled out from under the rubble. The skinny little girl's body was blown to shreds in her jumpsuit. She was completely finished, and Biryukov could barely hear her heartbeat. The little girl needed the warmth of the water of his home on the forest Zemka, just as it was a long way to the nearest village. He simply would not have had time to carry her. Then he ordered the feathered man to get into the fight and lie down, and then he gently laid the little girl on him and wrapped her in his jacket. "She needs to be warm," he explained. "You are warm. Lie down beside him and don't get up until I get there." The dog obediently folded everything around the child in a ring and a cross and began picking up the stag and dry branches, laying them out in a semicircle. Then he lit the resulting fire, returned to the dog, took the girl in his arms and entered the fire half-circle with her. And there he sank to the ground, cradling the baby in his arms. Another minute later, he took out a small thermos from his backpack with a sip of still warm tea in it and put it to his lips. It took at least half an hour before she was able to take a small sip. But then she fell back into oblivion. "That's good. That's good," repeated a delighted Baryuk, realizing that the first step to saving the little girl had been successfully made. Now it was necessary to get home with her. But to do this is not easy at all. A real snowstorm was moving on the forest and loosened the fire, wrapped the girl warmer and put his fur hat on her, took her in his arms again, and went on his way. He fixed himself very quickly, though frost was not very strong. With each step he found it harder and harder to move his legs. His breath was short and he was dizzy from fatigue. Several times he fell to his knees, clutching the child to his knees, clutching the child to him even tighter. Then, with an effort of will, he got up and walked again, not stopping for a minute. Night had fallen on the forest when a dark blur appeared among the trees, and a sigh of relief burst from his chest. A hand. It was his cabin. He walked to the door and suddenly realized that he was unable to unclench his hands. They had fallen silent and frozen to the point where they didn't listen at all. Or maybe he simply had no strength left. With great difficulty, he managed to open the doors. The house greeted the men and the dog a pleasant warmth, and Baryuk, laying the girl on the bed, and stubbornly 2 blankets, and powerless lay down next to her on the floor and closed his eyes. Boy crawled over to him and lay down beside him, pressing against his master with his huge, shaggy body to mature faster. They both woke up hearing unfamiliar sounds, and the little girl was crying quietly, not understanding where. The dog growled, crying angry. "Quiet, boy," said Baryuk, rising and sitting down next to the little girl. "What is your name?" he asked. The girl was silent, and only tears streamed down her cheek. "Quiet," said Biyuk in confusion. "There is no need to cry. I will not hurt you, and my doggy's name. Boy, too. He is good and kind. Tell me, are you hungry?" The girl nodded, but answered nothing again. "Now I'll get you something to eat. And while you are eating, a medicine has been prepared to heal you. If you don't, your skin will hurt a lot." "Good." The answer again was a nod of the head to him. But not a word escaped the little guests, Msu. The girl was mute. Biryuk did not understand this at once and continued his inquiries, trying to call her to the truth, but got nothing. And then suddenly remembered the inscription on the snow. "Look, that's what you wrote there in the Taiga. Find me, Mom." The girl nodded her head. "So you have a mother. So well with that, it is clear. But how did you end up there in the woods?" Horror flashed across the girl's face. She immediately covered it with her hands and cried again. Biryuk sighed. "You see, I have never had children of my own. I have no idea how to deal with you, especially with the girls. Don't you cry. Everything will be all right. Tell me, was your mother with you in the woods?" The answer was a familiar nod of the head. My goodness, had I not noticed her. "But where is she?" The girl made a vague sign with her hand, pointing upwards for some reason. Biryuk did not understand what she meant. Suddenly he cried out happily, then jumped up and went into the next room, where he brought a piece of paper and a pencil. "You do not speak, but you can write. Write your name." "Alice." "That's great. So it's you, Alice. Now, Alice, I'll feed you, and then you'll take your medicine, and I'll treat your wound. See how frozen you are. See how frozen you are? It's a good thing you hid in your felt boots. And if you'd stayed in the snow, you'd be in trouble." The whole evening, Biryuk took care of the girl, fed her, nursed her, then cooked himself. The girl patiently endured the pain of his touch, even though he tried to apply the ointment as gently as possible. She also obediently drank the warm tea, then fell soundly asleep. Only now did Biryuk feel that he was completely powerless. His head ached and burned as if on fire. Clearly, the long walk without clothes in the freezing cold had not been in vain for him. He had a cold, and a bad one at that. "Well, we'll have to treat it," he said quietly. He took some of the same ointment he had used on Alice, worked on his face and hands, and kept thinking of Alice's mother. There was no adult trace, and the neighborhood was completely gone. A lot of snow had fallen, of course, but they were not the kind of drifts in which one could get bogged down. And why was Alice pointing up? Maybe she wanted to tell her that her mother had left her here and gone away. But it was miles from where he found the girl to the nearest highway or decent roads. Many miles. No car would pass through these woods. Biryuk didn't eat dinner. He had no appetite at all. So he fed the dog, he lay down on the old bed and instantly fell asleep. And in the morning, barely dawn, got up and, leaving the girl under the protection of the dog, went to the very place where he found her to look around again. Well, but no matter how hard he tried, he found no trace of Alice's mother's stay. On the way home, Biryuk turned in the village, bought an egg milk, paid for bread, which she often bought with his share, if she saw that he did not have time to come to the shop. "Listen, Stone," he asked cautiously. "Have you heard of any incidents?" "What kind of accidents are we having here?" "Well, Frank Kasoy got drunk, chased his wife around. That's how she got used to it. Tom's house almost burned down. Thank God we saw it in time. But that's all right." The turkey was about to say goodbye when Stone suddenly spluttered, "Here I am." "That old pumpkin. A helicopter fell down not far from here." "And where did this happen?" "In Bear's Corner." Biryuk came to his senses. "No, not far from the snake company." "Are there any dead?" "God has taken away. Michael, Tom's son, told us that the people were afraid of severe frostbite in many people. But everyone is alive. The old woman willingly relayed the words at length to Biryukov, all sorts of details. At last she remembered about the porridge put in the stove and hurriedly said goodbye and ran to her place. When he returned home, he tried again to talk to the girl, but it did not lead to anything, and Biryuk stopped all inquiries. There was no way Alice could not be at the crash site of the helicopter. Stone said rescue workers had come. How could they leave a child behind? And anyway, the place where he found Alice. Locals call it Bear's Corner. Very often bears choose it for their den. That's why it got its name. This Bear's Corner lies on the territory which Biryuk, as a huntsman, is obliged to look after. And the place of the snakes is on the side, many kilometers away from the Bear's Corner. And this is already the possession of another gamekeeper, Old Blossom, and the air route on which helicopters flew never passed through Bear's Corner. Biryuk racked his brains, thinking of how little Alice had become impenetrable more often than not. Then he waved his hand. Let the girl recover first. She is so weak, and then they will figure out what to do with it. Could it be that her own mother had taken her daughter to the woods on purpose? Can people do such things? Would a woman who was carrying and bearing a child be capable of that? Thinking about it, Biryuk Spoon fed the soup he had just made. At this time, Diana and her mother were lying on the bed with their eyes closed and leaning over her. The man was scrutinizing her face. "You're so young and beautiful," he said. "I've only seen the likes of you in the movies. I hope you can hear me, because I want to promise you that I will do everything I can to bring you back to life. I will never let you go. I did the surgery on you myself, and I'm sure of the outcome. I am sure of the outcome. I am, after all, the best surgeon in the county. Anyway, you'll be well very soon. So, Archie, how is our patient?" The elderly doctor turned to her, and she saw a shadow of sadness run across his face. He's still unconscious, but all the vitals are good. I don't think that's today. She'll definitely be back with us tomorrow, although of all the injured, she is the heaviest. What about the others? Let's go through the wards with you, Archie, and see everyone. The operations were successful, and you know, I'm very surprised that no one died in such a crash. Yes, it's a real miracle, the doctor agreed, heading for the door after the nurse. They were talking about how a few days ago a helicopter carrying passengers and cargo went down in the Taiga. Rescuers were not immediately able to locate the crash site. It was not until late at night that they arrived at the site. Fortunately, despite the fact that among the victims were those who were in serious condition, everyone, including Diana, managed to save her life. She had been unconscious from the moment the helicopter crashed, and the rescuers at first thought she was dead. But the faint pounding of the young woman's heart. Diana was the first to be transported to the nearest hospital, where she underwent an urgent operation that took many hours. The other victims were also taken to medical facilities, and none of them would remember that her silent little daughter Alice was flying with Diana. The little girl was only 3 years old when, while walking with her mother, she was frightened by a huge pack of willing homeless dogs. The girl cried out sharply and has been silent ever since. Neither doctors nor broadswords, who promised for a good fee to cure the fright, nor the efforts of Alice's mother helped. The girl was silent, and for several years no one heard a word from her. Diane made a lot of effort to ensure that her daughter did not lag behind her peers in development. She took care of Alice herself and even managed to teach her to write. To her mother's great joy, the girl understood everything on the fly, grasping what her mother taught her, but she herself never said a word. One morning, Diana woke Alice up and said, laughing, that they would see her daddy very soon. "Only he is very far away from us," Mommy explained. "So first we'll take the train and then we'll get there by helicopter." Can you imagine? Alice, you and I are going to fly in a real helicopter. It's great, isn't it? The girl nodded and smiled. Most of the trip went without any adventures. But when Diana and Alice arrived at the heliport, they were told they couldn't take them. The helicopter was packed to the brim. No matter how much Diana pleaded with the not young, already austere pilot for all her pleas, all she heard was refusal. She also offered money, but this did not help. Then the woman burst into tears and despair. Looking at her, cried, and even, "You understand my husband is there." "In the Taiga," Diana said through her tears. "We are flying to him. We really need to." Surprisingly, it was their tears that moved the stern pilot and helped him make the final decision. Unable to stand it, he waved his flying machine away. "All right, get yourselves inside," he said. "Only the girl will have to be taken in my arms." "That's all right," Diana said hurriedly. "We won't take up much room." "Oh, thank you so much. I'm so grateful. You have no idea. And here, please take this." She handed him several large bills. The pilot took the money. What was the point of refusing an easy income? At least this month you can pay your loan on time, and the helicopter would hold out. After all, it wouldn't be the first time. Of course it was old, and it should have been decommissioned a couple of years ago. But meanwhile it was flying, and the company owners were not going to get rid of the machine, bringing them a good income. This time, however, something went wrong. They were barely halfway there. The problems began. The pilot did his best, but the helicopter did not obey him, went off course, and did not reach his destination. The machine collapsed from the sky to the ground. The old pilot was a true professional and made every effort to ensure that the fall did not become catastrophic. He succeeded, despite his many injuries. He and his passengers had no fatalities, except that at the moment of the accident, when the helicopter began to pitch from side to side, the passengers howled and screamed, "Goodbye, life." Alice slipped out of her mother's arms and fell out the open door. Diane screamed hysterically and began to yank the seatbelt she was wearing. She succeeded and jumped to her feet, but immediately fell down because the helicopter, swinging violently, now clung to the tops of trees, now with the last of its strength rose into the air again, dangling from side to side. The unfortunate woman was heard throughout the cabin. One of the men grabbed her by the jacket but could not hold her for long. The new blow was so strong that everything in Diana's eyes went dark. A minute later, the helicopter collapsed, and the woman lost consciousness. The pilot managed to send a distress signal, but the rescuers had to wait a long time. She fell a few kilometers away from the crash site, and she was miraculously lucky. Her fall was softened by the thick bush, and her winter overalls, though torn to shreds, protected the girl's body from the thorns. Still, the impact of the fall was palpable, and Alice lay there for a long time, unable to come to her senses. Feeling she was brought cold, and the girl, in pain and sobbing with fear, began to get out of the saving bush. She had no idea what to do or where to go, nor could she call for help. And who in this wilderness would have heard a weak child's voice? Night was coming, filling the taiga with strange and familiar sounds. Shivering with cold, Alice tried to climb a tree to escape the wild beasts. But her hands and feet did not obey her, and she could not climb even the lowest branch. Then she went at random, hoping that she would meet someone who would help her. How long Alice walked, she did not know. Suddenly, from somewhere in the distance came the cry of a wolf. The girl rushed to the side and immediately ran into the twisting branches, fleeing from a new danger. Alice tried to crawl under them as deep as possible, hoping that in this shelter wolves would not find her. Shivers of cold and fear beat her, and to calm herself down a little bit, the girl began to think about her mother. She hoped that she would find her. Very soon will come for her, not even guessing that at this time her mother is lying on the operating table and an elderly surgeon is fighting hard for her life. Alice fell asleep back into a ball. Day came, then a new night and day again. And all the time Alice then slept, or just lay there shaking himself from the cold, or fell into a kind of strange oblivion. Out of the shelter she did not dare, fearing a meeting with wolves. And only when the first snow began to swirl over the taiga, she got out to look at the huge flakes. She went to a small clearing, looked at the sky, and then a thought occurred to her. She should write to her mother to tell her where she was, give her a sign. Mom would fly to her in a helicopter. She told me herself that there was no other way to get here. Well, when she flies, she'll see the sign and quickly find her daughter. Alice wanted to write a lot, but only had the strength to write a few words. Find me, Mother. Suddenly, some rustling was heard, very close by. The frightened girl was rushing through the clearing. She had lost her hiding place, moved far away from it, realizing that she could return to it in her own footsteps. Alice rushed back and soon hid under the saving branches. And the snow went on, covering the forest, drained, under which the girl sat, a soft white blanket. The heart of the poor little girl was bursting with fear and threatened to just about jump out of her chest. But time passed, but nothing happened. Alice closed her eyes and fell back into a strange and disturbing dream. She dreamed that the wolves had found her and were now ready to tear her to pieces. The girl cried. Suddenly, all the wolves began to merge into one enormous monster, which leveraged its way into her shelter and then grabbed her. And then someone reached out his arms to Alice, and she flew off the ground. And then she felt so warm that her nightmares were replaced by kind and good dreams. And now she's sleeping in her crib again, and there's her favorite mommy nearby, always a little sad but so dear and caring. She wakes up. Alice is really in bed. But this was not her home. The girl got up and began to stare. Her gaze fell on the dog lying on the floor. The fear Alice felt at the sight of these animals instantly filled her entire being. The girl began to cry. The dog immediately screamed, but heard her master's calm voice. The bearded man came up to Alice and began to calm her. And then she was no longer afraid, because he had the kindest eyes in the world. When he told her how the fight was warming her in that hole, she stopped being afraid of him altogether. For 2 long weeks, Biryuk nursed the girl, himself on his feet, enduring a bad cold, and health gradually returned to them. But Diana was very ill. It was not long before she regained consciousness, and when she regained consciousness, for several days, she could not remember anything from her past life. She just lay there, staring at one point, then falling into oblivion. One day Archie looked in on his patient and sat down next to her. "How are we doing? How are you feeling? Are you in any pain?" Diana shook her head. "The memories don't come back. Husband, family, children, parents. You had someone, didn't you? You can't live alone for a long time. Everyone should have their own family. We live with my wife, my son and daughter have children of their own. Grown-ups. I have them. My son Oliver is in the capital, and my daughter Alice is here not far from us. She says I don't want to leave you two unsupervised. She's always been like that with me, Alice. You know, there was an occasion once. She was very small." But Diana didn't let Archie speak and sharply grabbed his arm. "Alice, my daughter Alice. My daughter Alice is small." She fell and broke. It was my fault I couldn't hold her. Alice, Alice. Diana was pacing around the bed, hysterical. She wanted to get up and run away, but Archie could hardly hold her back. The nurses came running at the scream, administered a sedative to Diana, and she fell into a long, anxious sleep a few minutes later. "What happened here, Archie?" asked the nurse. "Yes, you understand," said the elderly doctor thoughtfully. "I found our Diana's passport in the documents the rescuers gave us, and it says that she has a daughter, Alice, just a little girl. You know, I also have a daughter, Alice, so I decided to start talking about my daughter in front of Diana. Well, I was hoping to bring back some memories for our patient, and I think I succeeded. She remembered something, but I'm afraid I did it for nothing. Diane's daughter died, fell from somewhere. It's a very tragic moment in her life, and it was the first thing that came to her mind. So what to do? In a few hours, she will wake up and be just as worried. Since she remembered everything, she's anxious. Let's try to keep her on sleeping pills and sedatives for a while. She has a serious head injury. Among other things, we need to save her, even if she doesn't want to. Every time Diane woke up, she screamed about finding her daughter, demanded a rescue mission to the Taiga, sobbing and begging to save the little girl. Finally, one of the patients confirmed that Diana wasn't flying alone. There was a little girl with her. But what happened to her was unknown. At that moment, everyone feared for their lives and did not look at the screams. A rescue operation was organized, although after so much time, no one believed in success. People tried to find anything that could be left of the girl, but it was all to no avail. The snowfall that had fallen on the area hid traces under the thickness of the snow. The grief-stricken and grief-stricken and grief-stricken and grief. Diana was only able to be discharged from the hospital after a month and a half. For a long time, she stood on her doorstep looking up into the sky. And then she spoke softly. "You wait for me for a while, and I will come to you, son. I'll be sure to find you there. But first, I have to talk to your father and say goodbye to him forever." Diana closed her eyes and pictured the man she had loved all her life and never married. Liam Tall, Chernoff's hair and brown eyes. She fell in love with him the moment she saw him. It was the truest love at first sight that fate sends once in a lifetime. Diana had no doubt about it at all, although at that moment she was only 17 years old. Except her parents didn't appreciate her choice. "How could it be?" they shouted. "Do you want to realize that he's not right for you? Liam's our driver, he's a servant, a nobody, and you're rich, successful. You have your whole life ahead of you. Don't even think about him. Besides, he's 10 years older than you. Don't you have enough peers?" Yeah, she didn't have enough of them. She didn't have enough of them. She didn't pay any attention to them at all. And what could she be attracted to in a man her age? Some of them were real courts, were not protected from the tutor who prepared them for prestigious universities. Others didn't care about anything from a young age, including their rich parents. They grew up with life lessons, bragging about the cars and gadgets they had been given, but they weren't anything of themselves at all. And Liam wasn't like that. He had seen life, understood a lot, and dreamed of simple, understandable things. The woman he loved, his children, his family. And Diana knew for sure that she would be that woman. Yeah, here's the trouble. Liam was careful not to pay any attention to her. And when she came to him one day in the garage and in an outburst of emotion threw herself on his neck, he gently closed her arms and then sat her down next to him on the couch. "I'm a grown man and you're just a little girl. Let's make a deal with you. You grow up fast. I'll wait for you. You'll be fine. Just please don't rush it. Are you sure you're going to wait for me?" "Well, of course. I made a promise." "Okay, just kiss me once then." Liam kissed and she walked away, pressing her palm to her lips, as if she wanted to keep the taste forever. Liam looked after her and smiled sadly. Of course, he'd told her that on purpose, not wanting to traumatize the tender maiden's soul, but realizing that her crush would quickly pass and she would soon forget him. Except that Liam was wrong. Diana had not fallen out of love with him. Now she kept her distance. But he saw her eyes, hear the gentle voice, and he did not notice how he fell in love with this beautiful girl. Yes, she was not made for him. Too young, too beautiful, too rich. And so he drove all thoughts of her away from him, Diana had not turned 18, and she had been sent to study in the capital. Liam missed her but didn't show it. He was sure that in the hustle and bustle of the capital, the girl had forgotten him. And again he was wrong. One day at dawn she snuck into his room and woke him up with a kiss. "Give you back your present," she laughed when he opened his eyes. "Diana," exclaimed a surprised Liam. "And when I arrived, no one told me. I was supposed to meet you. At night, no one knew I was coming. Liam, my love, it's your birthday. How could I miss it? And you know what I got you." The man wasn't surprised. Diane stood up and with a slight movement took off her shirt. Then and skirt fell at her feet. "My gift will be me. I've biffed will be me. I've been saving myself for so many years. For you," aghast Liam. His resistance was quickly broken and in each other's arms. They forgot about everything in the world. From then on, every time Diana came home, they secretly belonged to each other, stealing their love from the world. But one day, one of the servants spotted the landlady, daughter moving into the driver's room, and hastened to inform her father. He immediately went there, and in 2 hours, a crying Diana was on her way to the airport, returning to the capital. And Liam, having endured a serious conversation with his host, but all his assurances that he loves Diana did not resonate in the heart of a stern father, and he recommended the failed son-in-law to look for a new job. That same night, the garage caught fire, and the police arrived on the scene and took Liam as the prime suspect. No one listened to either Liam himself, who claimed he didn't do it, or the old gardener, who was willing to confirm that he had been with Liam in his sack the whole time and was giving advice to the young man how to get on with his life. The very next day, after receiving a tidy sum from the landlord, the gardener recanted his testimony and left the house for good. Soon there was a trial. All of Liam's property was confiscated, even the little house in the village where his mother lived. The old lady sheltered a cousin. But the thought that her son would spend a few years behind bars killed the unhappy woman, and when Liam was released, he wept on her grave for a long time. Then he went to Diane's house. He wanted to talk to her father, but he couldn't. Neighbors told him that the family had long ago moved abroad and now lived somewhere in Europe. Liam stayed in the city for a while, but he could not find work or a place to live. And then he decided to go to the outback. Somewhere out there in the Taiga at the lodge once lived his grandfather. Maybe he would come in handy there too. It was better to live away from people, in peace and quiet. Only how to be with his memories, how to reconcile with the fact that because of him, his mother died. How to forget the tender and affectionate Diana. How to stop thinking about the happiness she promised him. They say that time heals, but something wasn't helping Liam. At the ranger station, he was welcomed with open arms. There was a catastrophic shortage of gamekeepers. No one wanted to come here for a penny and to live in such a remote place. But it was just what was looking for him. And very soon, everyone in the neighborhood started calling him Biryukov. Biryukov was feared more than fire, and there was always order on his property. One day, a deputy who was creating in the State Duma came to him and said that he really wanted to hunt bears. Liam refused him, explaining that, first, it's not the season and shooting bears everywhere is prohibited, and secondly, his territory belongs to a protected area where hunting is impossible in principle. The deputy's assistants, who came along with him, tried to solve this problem, as they are used to do through a large sum of money. But Bilyuk only grinned in response and advised them to get out of here quickly. There were also attempts from other people either to bribe or to frighten the gamekeeper. Both the first and the second were utterly useless. To anyone who trespassed on his territory, he was merciless, but if anyone needed his help. Liam didn't wait to be asked twice, and so selflessly did everything to save Alice, and then cure her. He sincerely attached to the girl, and she paid him in return, though she really missed her mother. One day, Liam, together with faithful boy, went to the village of Stone for milk. The old woman already knew Alice's story and felt very sorry for the girl. "How nice that you came with Alice. They came to see me in the night." Liam looked at Alice hesitantly. "Do you want to stay?" At that moment, Stone's grandchildren ran out into the street and cheered. They begged Alice to stay with them. She nodded happily, and they immediately dragged her along, taking her hands. Liam laughed. "You stay too?" "Oh, thank you. But some other time." Here Liam handed the old lady the money instead of a present. "Will you buy something for your granddaughter? Just tell him to drive carefully. I know he doesn't drink, but it's the roads around here. You know what I mean?" "Don't worry," the old woman reassured him. "Everything will be all right." Liam was barely home when there was a knock on the door. He turned, frightened at the knock. Could it be something with Alice? Liam opened the door abruptly, thinking he would see the girl, but on the threshold stood the one who had only come to him in dreams. Diana gasped. "Liam, how did you find me?" "I was told that you had gone abroad for good." "My God, my girl." She could not utter a word, just sobbing, fell on his chest. When she had calmed down a little in his arms around her, she began a long story about how she had been living all this time. "It was my parents who had gone abroad. They still live there, and I stayed here. They gave up on me, and Liam thought I had betrayed them, disgraced them. I know my father put you in jail. Only everyone was hiding from me where you were. How are you? Did you find me?" "My cousin Victor. He's an assistant deputy. You must remember him. He used to come and visit us a lot. He knows our history. Yes, everyone in our family knows it, but he talks to me. Just the other day, Victor called me and told me about seeing you here. They wanted to hunt bears. They came to see you, but they weren't allowed. Victor recognized you right away and told me everything. He knew I was also waiting for you. I am so happy." "No, Liam, I'm so sorry to you because I couldn't protect my happiness. We had a daughter. When we broke up, I was pregnant. My parents insisted I get an abortion, but I didn't agree and ran away." "But where is our daughter?" Liam asked, choking on sobs. Diana told of how together they had flown to him in a helicopter, but it had crashed. The unfortunate mother admitted that she could not hold her child, and she died somewhere in the Taiga. Liam could not believe his ears. He only held the woman he loved tighter and tighter to him. "Now listen to me," he said, interrupting the flow of self-serving revelations. At first, Diana did not understand what he was talking about. Then she screamed, unable to contain her emotion. "Where is she?" "At a birthday party." "Where?" Diana exclaimed in amazement. And when Liam explained it to her, she laughed and rushed to kiss him. Then they sat in each other's arms for a long time, talking about their daughter, wondering how she had survived the fall. If only she could tell. Liam sighed. "But she doesn't talk all the time. At first I thought she was afraid of me, but she isn't. Maybe she's still reeling from the shock. After all, she's still a kid and she's been through so much." Diane shook her head and told Liam that when she was a child, Alice had been frightened by dogs. She hadn't said a word since then. She's also terrified of dogs. "Yes, they're best friends with the fight," said Liam, pointing to the faithful dog. "How handsome is he?" Diana nodded. Then the door swung open and ours appeared on the threshold. When she saw her mother, she cried out and rushed to her. "Mom, I was the first one to find Dad. Alice, my daughter, you're alive. You're talking." There was no end to the kiss. The astonished Turd and Liam stared at them, unable to look away. When did the emotion subside a little? Diana asked her daughter, pointing to Liam. "Daughter, but how did you know it was your father? So you said yourself that he's the kindest man in the world, and I have his eyes too. "Look, we look alike, don't we?" Liam rushed over to his girls and held them tightly to him. Never before had the old cabin promised so much happiness in itself. God willing, even the fight was fun to bark at withal. And a year later, together with his pet Alice, was looking at the tiny baby which Liam and Diana put in a small crib, and it was a new happiness settled in their home.